Hello, ladies and gentlemen and bacteria, children and adults, things that LA alike. Welcome to a different type of video I'm deciding to do. This one's a lot more simpler than other videos I've ever done on this channel, specifically, I guess you could say. For those of you curious as to what I'm talking about, well, I've never really done a One Piece discussion video on my channel, or really too much. This is purely just to get more sort of attention, or just dipping my toes into the water to see what I can do. And I always wanted to talk about this particular topic in mind, as you can see by the title, because not that many people talk about it, and I wonder whether or not I could start it up again, and whether or not I could talk about it. Now, fair warning to any of my, subscribers, I am a avid One Piece fan. I really love the series, and I kind of suck up to it to some degree. But at the same time, I will warn you that if you're not a One Piece fan, you're not going to follow anything I'm going to talk about. So I won't explain too much about stuff, but I will be talking about, like, Nightmare Luffy real quick, just for those One Piece fans. So if you don't know One Piece too much, I really won't be explaining too much, so, keep that in mind. So this is purely just to really, like, dip my toes into the whole different stuff for my channel, just to talk about, especially to my other, well, not to my other demographic, just to talk about One Piece in general, because I do want to talk about it at some point. I do want to talk about One Piece or anime and other stuff, maybe as a general, like, topics, possibly theories and other stuff I do want to see at least. So let's start off with the basics, or what exactly Nightmare Luffy is, or what we know about Nightmare Luffy. As we all know, Nightmare Luffy remnants or comes from when Luffy absorbed 100 shadows on Thriller Bark, forcibly, by the way. He wasn't, like, really too on board with the whole process himself, but transforming into a giant hulking blue, for some reason blue, character with black, eye shadow, something like that. Now, some people have, or at least, like, most people have reminiscent and talked about the fact that, hey, Nightmare Luffy's, body structure seems pretty similar to another bigger, slightly more powerful form that is going to be talked about later on in this video. But one thing I kind of want to point out is that the fact that Nightmare Luffy himself has a lot of abilities, technically speaking, or has a lot of potential, but is never really shown, and is kind of limited by his 10-minute limit. As people know, the Shadow Fruit allows individuals to see shadows, as well as what this particular form exactly entails. As shadows themselves seem to have some form of soul power to them, or at least to some degree, because they have personality and are able to give off the combat abilities of their previous owner to any individual, which includes, different people. Like, if you have a sword, you're able to perform any sword abilities, which Luffy does demonstrate in this sort of pseudo form, as he's never really good with the sword, but as soon as he's given a sword, Shadow Marine sword, Marines, Shadow, which has, the sword, which has sword capabilities, he's able to slice up a tree pretty easily. The thing with Nightmare Luffy is that he doesn't really demonstrate his sword abilities. Well, he does cut up, like, ores once, but that's about it. And we don't really see much of what Luffy can do in Nightmare Luffy form. He just beats the living hell out of ores very much easily. Pretty easily, actually. He does it, like, really, really fast and really quick. So after that, the time limit, which is, the 10-minute mark, like I said before, ends. He just reverts back to normal, and all the shadows leave him to go either back to Moria or go back to their previous owners. I'm not sure how that works particularly, because the Shadow Fruit is very much somewhat confusing to some degree. It's understandable, but some of the little nuances to them are a lot more confusing. And to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't be blamed if I said that most of One Piece doesn't make sense. But to be fair, it's anime, so I'm not gonna, like, go too deep into that type of stuff and how it doesn't work and stuff. But a possibility of what could happen if Nightmare Luffy ever returns, or how it could happen. As everyone does know, Gecko Moria himself kinda just, got beaten by Luffy after Thriller Bark, and then after Marineford, he was kicked out of the Marines, or the Warlords, because he was way too weak. And he was almost going to be killed by Doflamingo, but he actually escaped via having Absalom there. Absalom, I'll get to in a second, immediately turned Moria invisible, and then they both escaped. And Moria himself has not been seen since. He's referenced here and there, he might be talked about, I think, but there's nothing really about him that most people know of, like where he is specifically. You can assume that he's with Absalom, since Absalom saved him, and Absalom, I'm assuming, really either cares, likes, or at least has some loyalty to Moria to some degree, or maybe he thinks he could be beneficial to him, or something like that. To be fair, maybe he does see Moria as somewhat like has some loyalty to him and doesn't want him to die. You know, at least that's something, at least I can see. Absalom himself actually is still technically in the story, he's just not physically seen. He's mainly in the background as a journalist of some kind. He uses his invisibility powers to immediately make himself way more, you know, he uses these invisibility powers from the Clear Fruit, as some people would know, purely to get himself into a area or specific place undetected, unseen, and pretty much easily. Now, the way he does this nowadays is that he's just writing on newspapers as a pseudonym name. I think it's Absu. I could be wrong, and maybe I am, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to put an image on screen, and I can't read it, but you know, this is just me rambling, so possibly Moria could be with Absalom at the moment, and maybe one day Absalom will hear of news of the Straw Hats, you know, escaping Big Mom, and that could prove to Moria and Absalom that the Straw Hats are really, really strong at the moment. And I know what you're thinking. Moria at the moment really hates Luffy, really dislikes the guy. And yeah, that makes sense because Luffy kinda beat him and he almost lost his, or he sort of got more of his zombie army exposed as well as being destroyed. So he's angry that Luffy kinda beat him, and he's also angry, he could also blame Luffy because he got kicked out of the Warlords. Maybe he might blame him for that. But the one thing I do want to mention is that Moria really hates Kaido, at least to some degree, more so than Luffy. At least that's what I think it is the case, because Moria really didn't like Kaido at all. At least, either he picked a fight with Kaido, or Kaido picked a fight with him. It's not really too clear, because Moria himself actually name-dropped Kaido very early on. He was one of the, what do you call it, Yonko that we never really saw, but we heard about. Big Mom, Whitebeard, Shanks, Kaido, we heard about them, but we didn't really see them, and Kaido technically was, I think, the last person to be introduced. I could be wrong, at least in the Yonko terms. I could be wrong, and I maybe am wrong, I really don't know. But at least I've heard about it, and I got a general thinking about it. But Kaido himself did something to Moria, or Moria did something to him, where it could be similar to the fight with Kid, where Kaido might have been in the way, or you know, Moria himself would have gone after Kaido himself, purely just out of revenge, or whatever. Or just maybe he just, not revenge, just out of anger and maybe wanted to prove something. We don't know. But maybe Moria might see that, you know, the Strong Hands are strong enough, or at least, you know, tough enough to deal with Big Mom, and maybe, just maybe, they could be something where he could overlook the whole, hey, I almost tried to kill you, or I hate you with a burning passion, but I hate Kaido more because, you know, he's my enemy, so I'm gonna help you try to kill Kaido. And you may be wondering, well, how exactly would he help? Well, physically wise, I don't really think Moria has gone any stronger. Maybe he's gotten some training in, maybe he hasn't, I don't know. One thing I think that could be a possibility is that Moria himself has at least learned a little bit of training, or at least learned a little bit of what he could do with his abilities, and what exactly he can do with them. And one thing that I think he could do is that he could take certain shadows from individuals and put them into one particular person to make them even stronger, which leads up to what could possibly happen. And my thought process is that maybe in a fight with Kaido, if they ever do fight Kaido directly, maybe Luffy's fighting against him and nothing's working, technically speaking, and maybe Moria just pumps Luffy full of a lot of shadows, either from his Straw Hat crew himself or the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. As we all know, the Straw Hats have a Grand Fleet, which some people are hinting at could be used against Kaido, which I can understand. It makes some sense, at least. So maybe they might bring in the Straw Hat Fleet, and maybe Luffy will take on some of the shadows from them. And I think of it as a cool opportunity because maybe Luffy could absorb some of his own crewmates' shadows, like Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Chopper, Frankie, and Brook, Nami, all these other characters. And while he may not be able to use all of their abilities at once, like, for example, Frank or Brook's specific abilities, like, using lasers or robot arms, or even skeletal-like bone jokes, or, certain abilities that are restricted to certain people, like Chopper's Monster Point, maybe he can't be able to do that. But maybe he's able to perform other cooler things, like maybe he's able to do a black leg style, or even if he does have like a sword given to him, he could do one sword style from Zoro, and maybe if he has Nami's climate chai, he could do thunder. He seems like regular Luffy's able to conjure up lightning somehow, and maybe he could use that in a specific, more scientific way or more ingenious way, since Nami's smarter than Luffy, yeah. And Nami's able to use abilities, of weather patterns and stuff like that way better than Luffy could. So maybe she could use that to her advantage. Maybe Luffy in Nightmare Luffy form could use that and put it into his own mind and do a lot of other more strategic stuff. Maybe, maybe not. Again, Nightmare Luffy is kind of a brute, but we really don't see much of what he can't do, and it's not really fully well stated. But at the same time, we don't really know that could happen. Maybe it can. Oda does a lot of, well, it's an in-between, because like if you want to be cynical, you could say Oda does a lot of recycling, or if you want to be positive, you could say Oda is a very much great guy at foreshadowing. My opinion on that is completely different. I just know that, he does bring back a lot of stuff that is pretty good, at least in callback sort of sense, to other things, older stuff, that happened in the sort of near beginning of the series that happened now, and you're thinking like, hey, that's pretty cool reference here and there. And it does somewhat serve a purpose to some degree, at least to some degree. So it's at least nice to see. But maybe, and that's something here that also happens here, because like, the thing with Moria himself is that he name-dropped Kaido very early on, which I think really will show off more of Moria's backstory to some degree. At least we'll see some more of it, at least. Because it's like, if you name-drop, a Yonko, a very powerful Yonko, and you mention that, hey, you fought against him and you survived and ran away, even though your whole crew was wiped out, you ran away and actually survived and lived to tell the tale, you're at least, not too weak enough not to die instantly to him, that's one thing. But that's also, with what we know of Kaido so far, he's pretty tough as a character. So it's like, what happened between the two? Or, it'd be, like, kind of surprising if Moria was never really brought back ever, to face against Kaido in any of the future installings with Kaido in mind. So, maybe with Moria's inclusion, if he ever is brought back, during the whole Kaido War saga, whatever you want to call it, maybe Nightmare Luffy might return, I don't know. And I know what everyone's thinking, well, what about Gear 5th? It's basically Nightmare Luffy, but better, technically. And, yeah, Gear 5th is, no, Gear 4th, what am I talking about, Gear 5th? Gear 4th is technically sort of based off of Nightmare Luffy to some degree. Some people may agree, some people may not. Some people may say, oh, Oda's sort of referencing back to it. Because Gear 4th Luffy has somewhat similar qualities where he's a lot buffer and bigger. And he has those dark rings around his eyes, or a dark ring around his eyes. But the thing I see it as, like some people would like to point out that, oh hey, Nightmare Luffy versus Gear 5th Luffy, which one would win? I think Gear 5th Luffy is way stronger than Nightmare Luffy at the current state he was in, but the one thing I kind of look at is a possibility of having Gear 5th Luffy mixed with Nightmare Luffy, or any of his other forms. Like Gear 4th Luffy Nightmare. That'd be a pretty cool, at least transformation to see. And maybe it could be a possibility against Kaido. Maybe Moria, if he ever does help them, decides to steal shadows from 100 people, or even more if Luffy's a lot stronger than he was back then, and puts it into Luffy, he'll fight off against him and say, "Oh, I'm gonna give you all these powers, Straw Hat, because I don't want to have Kaido win. I just want to kill him." And since Luffy's in this state where he's really much a brawler and really destructive, he might actually try to kill Kaido since he's more, more ferocious and more serious. So he might actually try to kill Kaido in this form. And maybe it would be enough, maybe it won't be enough. I don't know. All I do know is that it sounds like a cool premise, which I kind of want to see. I mainly wanted to just talk about it. But also, some other people haven't really talked about it either, so that's also why I'm bringing it up. So, I don't know, maybe Gear 4th, Nightmare Luffy may never happen, maybe Nightmare Luffy may not return in general. But, I'd like to believe it at least. So, what do you guys think about Nightmare Luffy, if it ever does return? Do you like Nightmare Luffy? Do you want it to return? Do you think it could return? Do you think Moria will become a somewhat of an essential character to some degree, at least in the coming, Kaido Wars, that some people might call them? If you think so, then leave a comment down below. If you don't, well, I don't blame you, because in all honesty, I don't know about that. This is all speculation, and whether or not it does happen is completely up to Oda himself. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe for more, and I'll see y'all next time in the next video. Until then, sayonara, my bots. This was a pretty long video. Whew.